Okay, we're recording now. Today is, hold on, let me get the January 26th. So January 26th, and it's the morning section of LNM 4. I can't switch to gallery view. That's fine, because I know who's on. All good. Okay, so today we're going to continue. I encourage you to have a look at the video. I think it's uploaded. I know the one from the section 2 was uploaded yesterday, so I believe that Professor Carlos received the one from 4 as well. And for the introduction last week, which was a short week, as you know, we always start sort of in the middle of the week. To not make it too exhausting to start, I guess. I don't know why that is, but all colleges actually start in the middle of the week in the first week back. I introduced 2 topics that are going to be followed up in keyboard skills with Professor Margaret. One was basically C-clef reading. I'm going to do a very, very brief presentation on that. There's really only 2 C-clefs that you have to know. And all you have to know is how they work and how you can transpose and sort of refer to something that you know already in order to read this new clef. I understand that reading skills is still something that is an issue for a lot of students. And there are ways of dealing with that issue. The best way to do that is to go to a website called teoria.com. I'm going to write that down when I get to the board. And go on to clef reading. But there are other websites too that are really doing the same thing. Note Builder is one. They're all listed in the syllabus as resources. So go to some of these websites, download whatever you can on your phone, make use of your, say, commute time or whatever time you have available where you can't really practice and drill yourself in identifying notes in different clefs. That's actually, it's something that we all should be doing. I should be doing it too, really, because it strengthens your reading no end. So that's that's topic number 1. Topic number 2 are what we call augmented 6 chords. And as I explained last time, I'm simply starting this time a little bit in reverse compared to what I normally do. Normally, I throw the net quite wide and we start with the big picture and then we sort of squeeze everything together and end up with the detail. That way of teaching is the way that I prefer. I think is the way that most people agree is the best way, in a way, you know, that if you start with the detail, you know, some students, especially in the early years of study, can't really place those details into it. They don't, in other words, students in the beginning don't understand why this is particularly difficult and why this is particularly important. And therefore it becomes difficult because things that we're not motivated to learn because we don't see the relevance of it, we have a way of sort of just weeding that out. That's information that we don't need, and therefore it's pushed to the background. And that's detrimental to this, because sometimes we have to teach details that we can't really see the value of them and how they fit into the big picture right away. So nevertheless, I am going to start in reverse. I likened it, so I'm going to start with the detail. The detail actually turns out to be, when it comes to augmented 6 chords, to be quite simple. They're actually very, very easy. And I remember with some considerable trepidation, actually, when I was a student, because this is considered one of the sort of top ends of tonal theory, where you have the sort of expectations that we have painstakingly built up over years of studying tonal harmony. You have them break down, and that's exactly what happened sort of in the in the middle of the 19th century. I mean, not that these procedures hadn't been used before, with some sort of shock effect, I guess. But in the mid-19th century, composers started using these sort of breakdown of tonal parameters and tonal strata, and creating very, very unexpected outcomes. Basically, our expectation of how tonality works were thwarted, meaning that the outcome was different. I'm going to go through this in some detail, and then gradually we're going to tell the full story with the help of Professor Carlos, of course, because these are reflective of certain issues in society where institutions were breaking down. It's very apropos of the time we live in right now, in fact, because music that was written in the time right after the American Revolution and the French Revolution, I think Americans maybe tend to forget perhaps that the French Revolution happened 14 years after the American Revolution. So the American Revolution in many ways was a bit of a model for what took place in Europe, and much for the same reasons. As a matter of fact, one of the envoys or ambassadors, as he would be called today, one of the advisors, leaders of the French Revolution, was obviously one of the main characters in the American Revolution. So Professor Carlos will explore this in some detail with you. And the relevance today is that some of these procedures we could see in the mid-19th century or sort of earlier, late music by the middle period of Beethoven, for instance, around the third and the fifth symphony, very revolutionary pieces of music. We can see the same harmonic procedures being used in the mid-20th century, in the 1950s, by characters in New York City, like John Coltrane, for instance, who's widely regarded as a revolutionary musician, of course, living at the height, as he did, of the civil rights movement and all the changes that took place in American society at that time. The music that we call bebop today is deeply reflective of these sort of changing schisms, the changing foundations for society. And it's very, very interesting to study. As a matter of fact, later on this semester, I've proposed that it hasn't been approved yet, or at least I don't know if it has been approved, but we will have a council on the 1st of April. You may have heard about it already. We have an Institute for Racial Reconciliation at Nyack College. It's a very appropriate place to have it, in fact. I think we could be leaders in that, with that voice of our students and faculty, because we have a unique composition of students. You won't find this level of engagement and the composition of our student body in many other schools in New York City, and this is the place to do it. So in that forum, I proposed a little presentation on exactly Beethoven and Coltrane. And the subtitle is, Harmony as Resistance. So that's what we're going to explore today. I'm going to show you but starting with the detail. I mean, the conversation that we need to have, of course, will take place a little bit later, and Professor Carlos will follow up. But what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to break down the details, because experience has taught me that the details are somehow, they seem to be difficult to grasp. And the way we've done it here, doing it that way, they're not difficult at all. They're actually very, very simple. Most things, if you really know your stuff, can be made very simple. So that's what I'm going to do, or propose to do. And I think you'll agree with me that it's not going to be too difficult. So I'm going to switch my view now. I'm going to take my iPad and set it up with the board, and we're going to go through the 4 different augmented 6 chords. This, by the way, if you're a jazz aficionado, you would recognize in an instant that these are the chords that are used by John Coltrane in Giant Steps. So this is the chord, the altered secondary dominant, or altered 5 of 5 with a flat 5. So if you're a jazz buff and you already know all this stuff, you'll recognize it like this. Say, ah, that's the Coltrane chord. Because in an instant, you can flip from C major to D flat major, or vice versa. In other words, you can do giant steps in the circle of fifths. And that's a very, very interesting proposition. So today, just the nuts and bolts. The nuts and bolts are really, really easy. They look like any other nut and any other bolt in any kind of progression. So that's where we're going to start. And once we have that, once we polish these little details, we'll put them together and we'll start listening to them. Professor Margaret will drill you in this. That's the plan, at least. It's obviously quite difficult to have two different teachers with two different backgrounds and all that do the same thing at the same time without knowing exactly where the other professor is coming from. Nevertheless, that's what we're going to try today. And remember that LNM4, we haven't done this yet. You're the first ones. I mean, I've done the topic a billion times. As a matter of fact, it's probably a topic I've done more than any other topic. So it's not the topic itself, it's just the combination of all these different moving parts. Keyboard skills, musicology, meaning music history, and music theory that we're combining. And of course, ear training, it would be great, ideal, in fact, if this would be followed up in ear training. So I think that's probably a little bit too ambitious to think that that's going to happen without having tried it before. We'll get there eventually. Okay, so I'm going to switch my view back with you in 20 seconds. Okay, for some reason, you guys are not appearing as a gallery view. Oh, there you are. Okay, very good. There you are. Oh, there's a whole bunch of people in there. That's great. Perfect. Okay, so, all right, I think we have enough of the board covered there. Very good. What we did last time was just the mother of all arguably augmented sixth chords, at least the one that's easiest to write. That's called the Italian augmented sixth chords. So let me go through this. We have the Italian augmented sixth chord, We have the French augmented sixth chord, the Swiss augmented sixth chord, that's sometimes called the English, of course, just to confuse people, but we call it the Swiss. But you know, you probably find different names used by different people. And then probably the most common one is what is called the German augmented sixth chord. Why they're called these place names, I really can't tell you. I don't think anyone can. And if they claim to know that, they're full of prunes, because it's just simply a name that's been given to it, right? So they don't mean any particular thing. There's nothing particularly Italian about the Italian augmented sixth chord. It's just a name. It's just an identification. That's what the pros call it in all colleges. So that's what we're going to stick with. We can call it Kevin augmented sixth chords or whatever. But the world outside of Naya College wouldn't know what you're talking about. So we're just going to stick to the professional names. And here it is. Oh, that's a good start. And today, as a follow-up, just when I finish this lesson, I'm going to write up a little homework assignment and send to you. Okay, so the Italian augmented sixth chord is spelled like this. Flat 6. This is an SATB, right? So we understand. And at the end of the lesson, I'm going to write up a little diagram and send that to you as well, along with the homework exercise. Basically, right now, we're going right back to what you might call sort of basic music training and just spelling out these things. We're not really sure what they mean, but that will gradually emerge as something that we know better. So in whatever key you're in, you have the flattened sixth scale degree in the bass. You have scale degree 1 in one of the inner voices and scale degree 1 in the other inner voice, meaning the tenor and the alto, they take scale degree 1. Now, and then the soprano usually have scale degree raised 4 or sharp 4. Now, in real music, of course, you can have any of these scale degrees in any voice you want, but this is the most schematically easy setup that we can use. So we're going to use that. And let's just start as we did last time in C major. And then I'm going to move across the board and do the French, the Swiss, and the German. So we have these things going on. So when you see a letter name in a circle, that means we're in that key. And we have to understand that the way that we set up our program here, major and minor keys are really the same thing. They're not the same thing. We understand that they're not the same thing, but you can switch back and forth between them. So that means C major and C minor are really more similar than different in the way that we're treating it. Why do we do that? Well, because a lot of gospel music actually behaves that way. So instead of comparing C major and A minor, which is the same scale and they're relative major and minor of each other, and we understand that they have a lot in common, but it proves easier for our purposes to compare a major key and its parallel minor. So that means that all the chords and processes that are available in major are also available in minor, and vice versa. That is actually, if you want to know a key to understanding gospel and jazz to a certain extent, jazz is a little more complicated than that. Gospel being the more conservative of the two art forms. The key to understanding gospel is really to understand modal mixture. There will be primary modal mixture and secondary modal mixture. That's what is called in traditional theory. I'm just going to bypass all of that and just call this gospel theory, if you like, because all these altered chords are more common in the minor mode, right? But if we import them into the major mode, you will hear right away, as when we were studying the predominance last semester, you notice that if we took some of the predominance that the ear associated with the minor mode and imported them into the major mode, it sounded very gospelly. So it's not that we don't know the chords in, say, music before gospel. As a matter of fact, all the chords that we studied last semester, you could find in Bach chorales, and you could find them really in high Baroque music primarily. It's just that the context in which they appeared were different, and therefore they sound different. And so the let's say the historically uninitiated, they would appear to be unique to later styles of music. That's a very common misconception that people have. Let's say if you study in a jazz school, for instance, you would probably what was it yesterday? I had a in the LNM2 class, I said to them in my homework assignment, I pointed out that when you're writing triads and when you're inverting them, and when you're trying to, if you're writing progressions using triads, for instance, it's actually an option. You may recall this from last semester as well. It's an option to use the fifth in a chord or not. If you can get to the fifth, that's fine. That's great. I mean, it gives a full sound, sounds very rich and all that, but there's nothing the fifth does in a chord that the root doesn't do just as well. So the fifth being a neutral interval, if it's not altered, right? It adds nothing. It adds a little bit of texture. And I compared it to cooking. If you add water to a dish, you're not really infusing any new taste into the dish, but you are changing the texture of it. So I think that's a very easy to understand comparison. And many jazz players, because this is a sort of jazz maxim that, you don't need the fifth in a chord. You need a third and you need a seventh. And then they think that that's jazz theory and that originated with the beboppers of 1950 or whatever. No, this is an observation that was made back as far back as the mid-16th century. And so were all the modes, by the way. All the modes that we're using in jazz today had their origins in the Middle Ages, right? So there's really nothing new under the sun except the way that we are using things. And that's where the interesting thing takes place. Okay, so let's translate this. Let's just do it in C major because it's easy, right? We know C major very well. Now, this is the way I would like you to think of this. We can see that these two scale degrees are the altered ones. We can see obviously that the unaltered ones are the two inner voices. And scale degree 1 is actually pretty simple. So I can put that in very easily. I'm just going to put it in as the same note in both voices. So scale degree 1 translates to C, obviously in the key of C major. And so does scale degree 1 here. C and C. Easy, 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 easy peasy, right? There's nothing difficult about this. If you've gone to a different school, I mean, I venture to say any other school, you would probably spend a whole semester on this stuff here. And you would hear a whole bunch of late romantic pieces of music that sort of explore this, and you would not find the breakdown right up front as we're doing here. That's for sure. You will arrive at that at the end of the semester. I think this is easier, by the way. I really think that that's a lot easier. And let me just take this away, the arrows. You don't need that because you understand the scale degree 1 is C, and so is scale degree 1. That's also C. In the key of C, if I had E flat here, those would be E flats, right? It couldn't be simpler than that. And now I have to sort of do a little bit of common sense. I hear very often that music is like math. And I guess people have repeated that so many times that we now think of, music theory is a little bit like math. Well, if adding numbers is considered math, which it clearly isn't, then yes, if you can add 1 and 1, or you can subtract 1 from a number, then sure, I understand that that's a kind of mathematics in a way. You will see that if I write up the numbers like that, if I take away all this sort of altered stuff, the flat here, the sharp here, let's just say that's not part of the equation we're trying to do right now. If I write up two numbers, 4 and 6, you can see that I've skipped a number. That's the number 5, and you don't need to be a math whiz to see this. Hardly. I mean, because if I can see it, it's just that my way of approaching things is probably a little more practical than some of these theory guys. Remember that my doctoral degree is not in music theory. Thank you very much. It's in music performance. So my interest in music is really as a means of communication. And I think it's yours too, probably. I'm probably not insulting too many people in this classroom by saying that most people's and most of your interest in this stuff in music is not as a sort of esoteric art or some sort of math equation, but simply just you want to know how it communicates, and therefore when you know how it communicates, you can communicate more efficiently yourself. And if you want to put notes together, in other words, if you want to be a composer or a songwriter, or somebody who just puts notes together, then this is good stuff to know. But we can say that in between these two scale degrees, we have scale degree 5. So scale degree 5 happens to be a very, very good navigation point because it's immutable and it's the same in major and minor, right? So it's a steady navigation point. It's not going to change. The only thing you require for navigation point is that it doesn't change. You see, otherwise you can't really trust how you navigate. So scale degree 5 is going to be the common bond between scale degree 6 and scale degree 4. And then we're going to worry about what the flat and the sharp means. All that means is that these two scale degrees have been altered compared to the scale. We're going to navigate scale degree flat 6 from the 5th scale degree. We're going to navigate sharp 4 or raised 4 from the 5th scale degree. One is a half step higher or half step above, and the other one is a half step below. And you can see which one is below. This one is below. It's just that it's the top voice, right? So, but it doesn't really matter. We still go just a half step down from 5, and this one here, half step up, and we can now call this sharp 4, flat 6. Easy peasy. It's as easy as scale degree 1. Because if we know scale degree 5 in this key, so I'm now going to translate this into the key. That's the note G, yeah? Very easy. Half step up from G would be the equivalent of G sharp, but you have to spell it with the next letter name up. Otherwise, if I say that a half step up from G is G sharp, that will be sharp 5, right? Raised 5 would be this one here. That's not the one we're interested in. We're interested in the equivalent, but spelled up with the next letter name. So flat 6 is A flat. How difficult is that? The answer is not very difficult, right? It's very easy. That's the one that goes in the bass here. So you can either write it down here, or you can write it up here. Makes no difference. It's the same thing. Now let me do the same with, so flat 6 is A flat. Easy peasy, right? Sharp 4 would be a half step down from 5. So not G flat, because that would be flat 5, but F sharp. That would be sharp 4. And that goes in the soprano. Here's your Italian augmented 6 chord in the key of C. If we get time, it's not really important because we can do it later on once you can do the nuts and bolts. I can go to the piano or the guitar or whatever. I can play it for you and hear how it sounds. Right now, I'm just interested in not making it too complex, but simply just to say, we can handle this. Not a problem. I'm going to stay with the Italian augmented 6 chord for a little bit. Do different keys. Just replace this one with different keys and see what we have. Yeah? So, any questions so far? Or is this easy to understand? Just give me a thumbs up and we can move on. Okay. Everyone's on board with this, right? Cool. I don't think it's difficult, but obviously, you know, I've done it a billion times before, so good. I get thumbs up. Very good. I've done it a few times before, so I know it's easy, but it's the same thing with anything. You know, it looks easy when the guy does it on TV, right? And then we think we can do it, and that may not be true, really. Not yet. Okay, I'm going to write it up again, so we have it and can compare it to. So that's the Italian augmented sixth chord in the key of C. Flat 6, 1, 1, sharp 4. Think of these as being raised 4 rather than sharp 4. In this case, and that's why I'm starting with C. I don't like C major very much as a key. I mean, not because it doesn't sound good, but because there's no up and down. You can't really see because there's no sharps and flats, right? So you can't really see what's up and down in the scale. Whereas other keys clearly have a raised leading tone with a sharp, right? So that works for me. There are other merits to other keys with flats as well. But in this case, it works. C major work or C minor, doesn't matter, works really well because flat 6 is in fact spelled with a flat. And sharp 4 is in fact spelled with a sharp. So that works really, really well. In this case, that's a great strategy to do. In other keys, it's not quite as easy to see. So I'm going to abbreviate this with IT. That's the way you very often see it. Not all the time. Some people insist on calling them very, very complex names. And that's, I don't know, that's probably just to appear smart. I don't know why, but then again, I'm not really a theorist, am I?
Professor, I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
So I understand getting the flat 6th and the sharp 4th for any key, but when you go to the middle voices, the tenor and the alto, will it always be just the tonic of the key, or is it?
Just call it scale degree 1. I understand what you mean, but call it scale degree 1 in this case.
Okay.
Because the concept of tonic is the movement from this chord to the 1 chord, right? So I just want to stamp that out in the beginning. Don't call these tonics, right? The concept of tonic is, but we understand each other, and I understand what you mean. Mm-hmm. Yes, in this case, it's simply just scale degree 1.
Okay, so like for example, if I was in D major, it would be.
We're going to go there, Kevin. So I think you'll see that right away. So let me do another key. Let me just do, I don't know. Let's do F major, right? Or F minor. Remember that this is C major, C minor. This is F major, F minor. We're going to do the same thing again here. So let me write it up just schematically. Flat 6 in the bass, right? 1, 1, and sharp 4. That's the Italian augmented sixth chord. This is the scheme for that. We're going to apply that to the key of F major. We can already do this one here. And I'm going to do it up here just because it's a little bit more of a challenge to read it with the ledger lines up, right? And I know some of you still have a problem identifying notes in the bass clef. The C clef will hopefully get a little time for at the end of it. Okay, so that's scale degree 1, and so is this. Oops. Scale degree 1, scale degree 1. Easy peasy. Let's go from the bass and say scale degree flat 6. We're going to find that. So again, we go to scale degree 5. What is scale degree 5 in the key of F? How do we find that? Well, we simply just say F is 1, F, G, A, B flat, or B doesn't really matter because you're going to end up with C. C is the 5th scale degree in the key of F. So that one is locked in. To find flat 6, I'm going to just go a half step up from C. What is that? And don't say C sharp because that's sharp 5. That's the same pitch.
D flat.
D flat, very good. So D flat goes in the bass, very good. You understand that half step up, right, would be flat 6. That's the one that goes in the bass. We're just going to stay with this for a little bit, and then we're going to do the other variants of it. Okay, that was easy, right? And everything is, in fact, easy. To find sharp 4, we go half step down from C. What is that?
B.
B natural. And now we understand that the spelling of sharp 4 is not necessarily indicative that it has to have a sharp in its name. But what we've done, because in the normal scale of F major or minor for that reason, it doesn't really matter because they're the same, luckily. That's why we can do this. If I write up an F major scale, I'll notice that my scale degree 4 is a B flat, because if I have the whole, half, and whole, and then whole, half, and you now begin to understand why it's so important to do it in a particular way. We understand, do we not, that all the problems we have later on in theory comes back to haunt us if we haven't done this the right way. So how do I raise scale degree 4 in the key of F? In this case, I'm going to erase the flat. Thereby, I have raised it. So think of this not as sharp 4. I mean, we just call it sharp 4 because it rolls off the tongue easier than raised 4 or lowered 6, right? That's not easy to say, but that in fact is the same thing. So here's the answer, in case you wondered, by the way, that when jazz players talk about flat 7 or natural 7 or whatever as being the same as in legit theories called a minor 7, that sometimes you will see classical theories sort of make jokes about that the B flat in a C dominant 7 chord, that B flat is natural 7, because that's what a lot of jazz players call it. They also call it flat 7, and that makes sense. But if you translate that to another key, let's say you have a D dominant 7 chord, and you have the C natural, sometimes they'll call that flat 7, right? And so there's a discrepancy between the way the note is called and the actual spelling of it. And you see the same discrepancy in this case. In this case, natural or B natural is raised 4, or what we call sharp 4. You just have to know that there's a discrepancy between the spelling of the note and the way that we call it. So any kind of theory has some built-in little idiosyncrasies that we just have to know, right? Remember that when you teach it particularly, and remember that when you go to grad school, because you're going to have a lot of students, future colleagues, who would be naming things differently. But we now understand that this one here is flat 6. This one here is 1. This one here is 1, of course. And this one here is raised 4th scale degree in the key of F. So far, so good, right? Very good. There's nothing difficult about this. The nuts and bolts of them are really, really, really simple. Let's do another one. Let's do B flat, right? B flat major, B flat minor. Here is another sort of comeback to some people who think, oh, you have to know your key signatures. Like B flat minor has 5 flats and B flat major has 2 flats. That doesn't give us any information that we really particularly need. It's good to know, but it doesn't begin to address some of the calculations that we're going to be doing. Okay, so again, here we can very quickly add, let's just, because we have no context, it doesn't really matter. I know that's an incredibly high alto. It's actually a soprano register. It doesn't really matter. We're just going to add it in there. So a B flat is a B flat is a B flat, right? Doesn't really matter where it is. Now we're going to find flat 6 in the key of B flat, major or minor. What is flat 6 in the key of B flat? Again, we go to scale of B5 because it's the same in major and minor, and it's easy. In the key of B flat, what is scale of B5? Move along, guys.
F.
Yeah, go. So somebody said something, and then they cut out again.
It's F. F. The fifth
F.
scale degree.
Yeah. So scale of B5 is F. Half step up. And it's not
G
F
flat.
sharp. B
G
flat.
flat.
Very good. Easy peasy, right? And half step down.
E. Yeah, E, right?
Carolee, go again. I saw you were on.
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay, half step down from F.
It's E, right?
It's not coming through.
She said E. E.
Okay, I couldn't hear it because E natural, right? So again, in this key, in all flat keys, you'll probably find that the raised fourth scale degree will just be a natural. Capiche? Easy peasy, right? Lemon squeezy. It's very easy. One more. Let's do A flat. So again, scale degree 1. Now we can do it without too many calculations because we're going to be good at this stuff here. A flat, A flat. Here is just the inner voices. Be sure to stem them. That's why I'm building this up very, very early on. Don't just write a note because in the heat of things, you tend to forget if it's a bass or soprano. In this case, this could be a soprano, right? Because it's in the right register for a soprano. But the thing is, as soon as you add a stem to it, you know that nothing goes below this note in this clef. Nothing goes above this one in this clef. You locked yourself in, and that's a good thing. You've eliminated all the bad choices that you could have made. That's freedom of choice, Christian style. I usually joke about this. If you eliminate all the... You like that, Jolie? If you eliminate all the bad choices, you only got a few good ones left. So you don't need to choose a bad one then. Okay, so flat 6 in the key of A flat, scale degree 5 is, yes, E flat. Okay, so now it gets a little bit hairy, doesn't it? What is a half step up from E flat?
E.
Well, a half step up from E flat would be what?
Wouldn't it be E?
It would be E, but that would be scale degree 5 still. That would supposed to be raised 5. Do you understand?
So
Oh,
F
okay.
flat.
So F flat.
F flat. Very good. Very good. Don't be afraid. This is the time where we are really using our confidence that we can spell these and you can now immediately see why the sort of traditional thing you get from particularly from jazz players saying there's no E flat. There's no F flat, it's E. And it's true, in other keys it will be spelled like an E. But in this case, it must be spelled like an F flat. The difference and the reason for that is very easy to understand, in fact, because remember that in traditional jazz notation, when you have a lead sheet, for instance, you don't have the chords written out because you don't need that. You just have the name for the chord, right? And the only thing you got written out is the melodic line. That's a very, very efficient way of writing out a score. It's very, very similar to in fact, to what you had in the 18th century. We had the church organist just writing down the vocal lines and then a bunch of numbers for chords called figured bass as the accompaniment. Because you if you're conducting, you don't want to turn pages all the time, right? And furthermore, if you're writing this stuff out with a quill and live ink, you want to have as few risks of making a mistake as you can. You want to eliminate all that. And it's very, very similar to jazz. So jazz players are not always, is in some big band scores, you'll see everything written out, the voicings of the chords, because now all of a sudden you've got a lot of moving parts going on. But typically in a jazz, especially in a small jazz combo, you just see the chords named by name, right? That doesn't make it better or worse or anything. That's just a style of notation. It's a very efficient way. So therefore, in that style, if you only have one line, this would obviously be an E, right? Because there's no reason to call it F flat. But in this case, there is a reason. Okay, half step down from E flat. So that would be sharp 4, right? Just remember the numbers. Remember that this is 4, this is 5, this is 6. So if you go up, you're going to flat 6. If you're going down, you're going to sharp 4, right? And we can add these to it because it doesn't really make it more difficult. It's just a half step instead of a whole step, right? Half step down from E flat.
D natural.
D natural, and you have to indicate that with the notation here, because in the key of A flat, we would assume that the D is a D flat. But so far, spelling out the Italian augmented 6 chord is really easy, right? You want to do a few more? Or should we move on to the next one? Because that's just as easy. What's the consensus here? We have a group of 7 students or something. Move on?
I think we can move on.
Move on. Okay, good.
I think we're good.
Okay, very good. We can also stop here if you like. It's up to you, because it's not much more difficult to go on, and which you'd see in a second, actually. I'm going to leave that. It's actually quite easy to go on. These are all Italian augmented 6 chords. Okay, let me move on then and do another one. And this one here is called the French. 6+ is the name that they all have. So 6+ means augmented 6. Let me just do the interval, for instance. You'll see here that, sorry, I started in reverse. Here's an interval of a 6. How do I know that? Well, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I know it's a little artificial to start with 1, but that's what we have. That's how tonal theory is calculated. So this interval here is what we call a minor 6th. And why is that? Well, because the flip of this one here is a major 3rd, right? So from F to A is what we call a major 3rd, or 2 whole steps. F to G, G to A, that's a major 3rd. And if you invert that, you'll get a minor 6th. We can do some follow-up later on with intervals, because that's a popular sort of confusing topic for a lot of students. They're not really sure why things are major or minor or whatever. And then they say a minor 5th, and they don't understand why that's not a minor 5th, because there is no minor 5th, right? It's either a pure 5th or it's diminished or augmented or whatever. So there's certain intervals that are perfect intervals. That doesn't mean they're better. It just means that they only come in one variety because they're part of the overtone scale. This one is a minor 6th. If I raise this one, I've made it bigger. So therefore it's a major 6th now. And if I also at the same time make the bottom note lower, I've stretched them further apart, and therefore this is an augmented 6. That is, when we talk about harmony, is called 6+. We also see the plus sign as being part of an augmented triad, for instance. So you'll be familiar with that already. That's not just what we do at Naya College, but that's sort of accepted professional writing. So an augmented 6 is that interval. And let me just write out that chord again. That with which we started. We'll see that the interval here is an augmented 6, and that's why they're called augmented 6th chords. Okay, so moving on to the French, all you have to do is to replace one of the inner voices with scale degree 2. And very quickly, when I eventually get to the piano, not in this lesson, because I just want to focus it on the nuts and bolts. When I get to the piano, you'll very quickly see that this is the same process as we saw when we talked about predominant. These are predominants too, by the way. But the other predominants that we studied last semester, you will see that all of these chords that appear to be different, they're actually just a melodic variation. You know, some scale degree that is raised because it's easier to sing that way. And therefore it's been raised and now becomes a part of the harmony. The greatest dilemma in jazz, for instance, is how to name your chords. Because you can have chords that have a lot of last names, you know, minor 7, flat 5, sharp 11, flat 9, or whatever. I mean, all these different extensions that that's just a choice that the author makes in admitting a whole bunch of scale tones as being part of the harmony. Now, that's an interpretation, right? That's simply just a choice that we make as musicians to say, okay, I hear that in this harmony, I have all these extensions being part of my harmony. That's what my ear tells me. Or it's simply just, you know, derived from ignorance. Very often, it's hard to tell if people are incredibly smart or if they're really, really dumb, you know. And so sometimes we have to weigh up these things very carefully because it depends on the context. We can't just call people dumb because they call it something different, right? That's not necessarily true, although it is often true. But here, let's start in, I don't know, in G, right? G major, G minor. And let me do the inner voices because we can, right? G, I have scale degree 1 as being my tenor. And then instead of having 1, I now have 2. Yeah, I know that's very, very complicated, isn't it? So instead of having G, I have the next note up, which is A. And you really have to break it down like this, say, I can do this. You know, if I can do scale degree 1, I can also do scale degree 2. Because in both major and minor, you have a whole step between 1 and 2. It is actually really, really solid, this stuff here. And then flat 6 in the key of G. Again, go to the 5th scale degree. In the key of G, the 5th scale degree is D, isn't it? Half step up would be E flat. Half step down would be C sharp. There's your French augmented 6 chord in the key of G. Questions? Okay, we're good, right? That's abbreviated FR 6+, because I need a little more space here. Let's go to, I don't know, E flat. Scale degree 1 is E flat, yeah? What is scale degree? Oh. Let me just check one thing. Just give me a second. Somebody just chatted. All right. What is scale degree 2? So let's just do the inner voices first, right? What is scale degree 2 in the key of E flat? Whole step up.
F natural.
Let's find scale degree 5 and do the flat 6 and sharp 4. So scale degree 5 in the key of E flat is
B flat.
very good. Half step down from B flat,
A natural.
A natural, very good. And we have to indicate that because the A that we expect in the key of E flat, major or minor, would be A flat. Very good. And what is then a half step down from B flat? Oh, no, I'm sorry. What did I do? Half step up. Oh, actually, we did this in reverse, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A
Yeah,
flat.
okay,
A natural supposed to go on top.
Yeah, so A natural goes up here, right? Because that's, if you like, the leading tone to B flat. So that's a half step down from B flat. So that's sharp 4 is A natural. That's the, as you can see, even if this is not difficult, you still have to really, I mean, I usually say it this way. Music theory is not difficult, but it is very accurate. It's incredibly accurate. You have to really, really know your stuff. Okay, what is a half step up from B flat?
C flat.
C flat. And there you go. I'm going to write it just down here. I could also write it up there, but that looks more like a 10 on note. So there is your French augmented 6 chord in the key of E flat minor, right? I mean, really, that's where we find it. 7 flats, but it doesn't really matter. We just have to take the scary part out. I think what confuses a lot of students is that it seems scary because you know that E flat minor has 7 flats. And then all of a sudden you think, oh, that's really difficult, right? But it isn't. It's the same thing in major and minor. And all we have to do is to sync intervallically. Okay, somebody give me another key. C sharp minor, how about that? C sharp minor, C sharp major. Okay, the one we can add in immediately is C sharp, because that's scale degree 1, that's our friend, isn't it? Scale degree 2 in the key of C sharp is what? Whole step up from C sharp. Yes, D sharp. I'm just going to move it along, and then I'm going to cap it off here and just send you the homework assignment for just the Italian and the French. All right, because I think that's good enough. Okay, go to scale degree 5 in the key of C sharp. What is that?
G sharp.
G sharp, very good. Okay, half step up from G sharp is what for flat 6?
A natural.
Mm-hmm. And a half step down from G sharp. Now be careful.
F double sharp.
Yes, very good. And that's notated like that with an X. Because if I go a half step down, we understand that it's a G really, right? You know, it's the same key as would be the enharmonic equivalent of G natural, but it has to be spelled with the letter name below G sharp, and it has to be the leading tone. So F sharp would not be the leading tone. That would be a whole step below. So we have to have F sharp sharp, right? Or F double sharp. Okay, I think you get it, right? This is really a spelling exercise. And it's, in a way, it's very similar to going back to music basics, or what we in the old days called basic music. That's what we did in L&M 1, right? Where we're just spelling out notes. And I keep saying to the students over and over and over again, I said, if you know a half step and a whole step, and you can find those values from any point on the keyboard, then there's not going to be a problem with music theory. And that is true. That is the truth. Everything revolves around being able to distinguish between a whole step and a half step. Think about it. All these different scales, you know, super Locrian, E flat super Locrian, whatever. they all consist, actually that's a bad example because that has a what appears to be a minor third. So that has altered intervals in it. But all the other natural occurring scales that we have in jazz, for instance, right? Mixolydian, Locrian, Dorian, whatever, are a combination of whole steps and half steps. And all the resulting harmonies are a combination of whole steps and half steps stacked into major and minor thirds, and sometimes some altered intervals. Because here is an augmented sixth. The flip of that, or the inverse of that, would be a diminished third, right? If you think about it, if I flip this one around, let's say I have that one. That's a minor third because I have a whole step and a half step up to A. That will be from F sharp to G, G to A. That's a whole step and a half step. But if I have this, that's a diminished third, right? And if I flip it around, we understand that that's an augmented sixth. You see, because they've both been pulled away from each other with a sharp and a flat. And now we see some really complex harmonies. These are called, by the way, chromatic harmonies, because now we can harmonize the chromatic aspects of the scale. We can get from the one we did in C major before, right? We can get to C major from that. We can also get to D flat major. And since C and D are related by half step, we call them chromatic harmonies. So if I were to translate, for instance, this interval here, I would see that this is the equivalent of a whole step. So a diminished third is the equivalent of a whole step, just spelled differently. Chords have to be, or at least chords in the Western world, no matter, regardless of style, whether you're talking about gospel, you're talking about jazz, you're talking about bebop, or you're talking about Beethoven or whatever, have to be spelled in thirds. They're called tertian harmonies. So they're third-based harmonies. But what you can see very quickly, I took you from something in the beginning of this class that was actually very simple, right? To something that is really starting to become very complex in a way, right? Because the component elements here, it's almost like phone numbers, remembering all this stuff, that remembering one phone number is not different to remembering 4 phone numbers, right? Each phone number consists of 10 separate digits, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're required to, and remembering one phone number is really hard enough, isn't it? You know, but remembering 4 phone numbers and keeping all these separate numbers free of each other, that proves to be very difficult for most of us. We have to have a strategy for remembering that. And for spelling this stuff, that we're going to start there, simply just by saying, okay, let's chunk all this together and go logically forward. So your homework assignment is basically going to be a stack of French or minor 6 chords and a stack of Italian or minor 6 chords. And they're just going to be labeled in the homework assignment FR 6+ for the French, and IT for Italian, 6+ for the Italian. That's your homework assignment. I think I want to cap it off here and just say we've done enough for one day, right? Yep. And you got to get a little homework assignment. There's not going to be hundreds of examples. If you can do it like, let's say 3 or 4 times, I trust that you can actually do it, right? Because the process will be the same, right? It's understanding the process that is the smart thing to do here. Any questions? Are we good to go? Fantastic. Okay, I'll see you on Tuesday next week. And that's when this is due. Just before class, right? You know. Kevin, go.
Do we stay for literature with Professor Carlos?
No, some of you undoubtedly know, but maybe not all of you know, that Carlos is actually quite sick. He's got COVID-19. Oh. He's been sick for almost 3 weeks. I spoke to him last night. I check in with him several times a day. He's been very, very sick. His father-in-law is in the hospital for the 2nd time, and his entire in-law family all have COVID-19. it started with just one person and it spread like wildfire in the entire family, and they're all very sick. So no, the answer is no. So keep it in your prayers and your best wishes for. I mean, he'll be fine. He's young and strong and all that. But it is not an easy disease to get rid of. Bear that in mind. Be super careful whatever you do out there. I know some of you have had it, so you know already. But there are people. I can. Carlos yesterday had a temperature of 102.5. So you can easily imagine, and he's 35, he is a runner, he does boxing, etc. He's super fit and healthy and all that. You can easily imagine somebody who was twice his age, like his father-in-law, 75, that it's really quite an ordeal at that age to deal with this. And especially if you have any kind of underlying conditions, it's really, really hard. Anyway, so on that note, so no, this is it for today, right? So we're going to break it down like this. Monday and Tuesday are going to be theory. I mean, Monday is relevant for you guys because that's another section. But for us, so the beginning of the week will be theory, and Wednesday and Thursday would be musicology. Okay. See you later. Have a great week and a good weekend. See you on Tuesday.